This is where you're really starting to see the benefits of retirement planning. So the whole idea of life-centric retirement plan is you start with your life and then you design the money around it, not your life around the money. Most people do it backwards. Retirement is all about you maximizing your life first, then optimizing the money second. If we haven't met before, I'm Planner Mike, a certified financial planner professional and owner of True Wealth Financial. I believe that retirement should be prosperous, enjoyable, and purposeful. A lot of people dream about retirement, but they find the actual transition, the path into it, to be laced with confusion, complexity, and challenges. And it makes sense because it's all new and you've never actually done it before. I help Christians create and optimize a retirement plan so they can retire with confidence. This month, we've been talking about investing for retirement. We started off the month by talking about risks, about how at retirement, there's a new risk that manifests itself called the sequence of returns risk. We talked about how the 3 buckets or the jobs your nest egg needs to do to help manage that risk and about how much goes into each bucket. Last week, we continued pulling that thread a little bit more. We talked about the idea of creating a personalized asset allocation based upon your actual income needs as you transition into retirement. Today, we're going to take it one step farther and talk about asset location. Location, not allocation, but location. Asset location refers to the types of accounts your investments are in. And generally speaking, there are 3 basic types: taxable, tax deferred, and tax free. I want to unpack each one of those a little bit, talk about the kind of the pros and the cons of each account, the types of investments that ideally you'd have inside of them, the tax impacts, and the general purpose for each of those accounts. Now, in disclaimer, this is more of a resilience or optimization tactic. So when it comes to retirement plan, we have kind of 4 different types of plans. We have a defined plan, which is the idea that you and or your spouse kind of get your plan out of your head. We refer to your needs, wants, and wishes. What do you want life to look like in retirement? Things like that. And then we combined that with your actual assets. How are you going to pay for it? And we determine whether it's a feasible plan of record or not. I was trying to get to next. Then after that, once we have a feasible plan of record, we can really start to dial it in and stress test it for various unknown factors in the future and optimize it. And this kind of technique here really falls in those last 2 categories. This will help it make it resistant against future income tax impacts, right? Meaning higher rates in the future. That's what would be designed for it, ideally, right? We don't know that if there is or not. Now, I know we're in the President Trump era. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in theory, will get extended, maybe, or permanently put in. I don't really know. But there is a looming debt problem for the United States government. And as all people know, what goes up must come down at some point. And so at some point in the future, in my opinion, that bill is going to have to be paid. And so taxes are going to have to go up at some point in the future. My own personal bias. So there you go. That's what this has helped make your plan resilient against future tax impacts and really to optimize your plan, right? You paying less taxes over time is the goal, which means less going to the government, more in your pocket, more growth for you and your goals and your legacy in the future. That's what this is all about. It's a resilience or optimization tactic. So let's unpack those buckets a little bit. The first one I want to start with is that of a taxable bucket. So this is an investment account that is not protected, does not have any tax advantage plans. We call it a taxable account, which means you pay taxes on the gains when you make them, either from dividends or interest every year, or capital gains when you sell a capital position. Now, generally speaking, this account gives you the most flexibility. There are no age limitations. There's no amounts that you have to put in, no minimums, no maximums, no income restrictions, no penalties. This gives you the most amount of flexibility to use it whenever, however, whatever you want it for. But keep in mind, as we talked about, right, when you make the income, the taxes are due. This account is really good for an early retirement, right? So if think about it, your other retirement plans are kind of locked up till 50, 55, 59, something like that. So if you're trying to retire early, this would be a good thing. If you're trying to retire at 50, for example, this would be a good place to have investments in that you can draw in that decade before some of those other things come available to you. You're essentially letting your long-term other tax advantage accounts just continue to cook for the future. Now, based upon that, you really don't want bonds here, right? So when it comes to investments, we have, stocks kind of in bonds, stocks being not, again, single stocks, but more mutual funds or ETFs that own a whole bunch of stocks inside of them. Bonds pay out a set amount every year, right? Dividends, essentially, or interest, which means they're taxed in the year that you gain the interest. Some kinds, you don't even get the interest, like treasury bonds. You don't even get the interest, and yet you still owe tax. That's called phantom tax. You pay tax on money you didn't really earn, which means it's phantom tax. But the real tax you pay, but the income's gone. It's phantom. It didn't really exist. It's kind of weird, I know. But so that's a good reason why you don't want to have bonds in here, right? When you pass away, if you have money left in this account, you will get what's called stepped up basis. So regardless of what you paid, your basis is what you pay for it from a tax perspective. But when you die, the fair market value, which hopefully would be more, it becomes quote unquote your basis, which means that's what you paid for. And so if your heirs sold it right away, what you sold it for and what you bought it for, in theory, is zero. And so it means there's no capital gains on it. So this is a good way to avoid long-term capital gains by having money in here that grow, right? So think equities, think in stocks, think long-term investments. That's the types of things you'd want in here. The only caveat with that is that you're trying to line up certain monies for certain timeframes. That, again, that's kind of the flexibility side of things. So again, this is really good for flexibility perspective, from death, from stepped up basis to avoid capital gains here, and for early retirement. Now, the downside of that, meaning you don't get any tax advantages of it. So this is where our tax deferred accounts come in. So generally speaking, these are retirement plans, either employer plans like 401ks, 403bs, things like that, or more traditional rollover IRAs, money that has never been taxed before. The tax is deferred. It'll be paid upon you taking the money out of the account. Now, generally, these accounts, especially the employer plans, are tied to your employment, meaning that you don't have access to the money while you're still working there. While you're working there, you can't get money out of your retirement plans most of the time. There's always some in-service exceptions to some plans, but generally speaking, broadly speaking, the only way you can get money from your retirement plan is you leave your employer, which is fine if you're retiring, but if you want some money, but you don't want to quit working yet, this isn't the account for you. Generally, these accounts are going to have age-based restrictions or conditions. They could be age 50 for some people, 55 for other people, depending on the kind of the plan, and 59 and a half for sure for most. Now, again, this money has never been taxed, right? So this could be a good place if you need bonds, right? So if you looked at last week's show, you need money coming out in certain years for certain incomes in the near term. This might be a good place to have those bonds that are not at risk at the market. They're kind of there being ready for those income needs, and you could take it out of this account. Now, these accounts are restricted from age perspective, meaning you can't get to it without penalty before again, the age changes based on the conditions. But for most of these, you also have RMDs, required minimum distributions. This is the only account of the three that has them. Required minimum distributions basically says the government has allowed you to defer paying tax on this income for all these years you've been saving, but now that you've hit the age of 73, essentially Uncle Sam's saying, I want my cut. You've had my money in your account. You've used it to grow. It's time you start taking something out. We call them required minimum distributions. At death, this account does not get stepped up basis. This is what is called income in respect of the decedent, and it will be taxed essentially as income tax. Because remember, this account, generally speaking, got there either through an employer plan, you put money into it, or you put money into a traditional IRA and generally got a tax deduction because of it. And so it has grown, and the way it gets taxed is when it comes out. Well, Uncle Sam doesn't give you a pass on you putting money in, dying, and then never paying tax. It doesn't work that way. So you don't get stepped up basis. means you have to pay taxes on all of the gains just like you would if you take it out. So again, this is an account that's geared towards retirement, geared towards could be mainly long-term, but this is a good place for those bonds in those short-term if you need it. If you're still with me, find this information helpful and valuable, please consider hitting the like button. It'll let me know to do more shows like this. Plus, it's a nice way to say thank you. So the third type of account is that of tax-free accounts. Tax-free generally is associated with a Roth account, generally speaking. Not all the time, but generally speaking. So again, these are going to be Roth 401ks, Roth 403bs, things like that, or Roth IRAs. Generally speaking, again, they're going to be tied to employment, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, things like that, which means, again, to get access to it, you have to leave your employer. You cannot be there working and take money out of the account. Most plans will not allow you to do that. You can do that with a Roth IRA. Roth IRA, you can take your contributions out anytime, tax-free, not necessarily penalty-free. There's some other caveats to that, but you can always take your contributions out. But again, generally speaking, these are going to have age restrictions. Normally, it's going to be 55 or 59, kind of depending on the account and on the rules. There's also some other conditions and rules on the Roth IRA side called a 5-year rule, which basically means if you put money in Roth and it be in there for at least 5 years since the account was opened, not necessarily since that money gone in, unless it's a conversion that has its own clock, the rules start to get complicated. At some point, I will do a whole series on Roth IRAs and accounts because the rules kind of get confusing. But generally speaking, the way to think about it is long-term plan. This is the best for the long term, right? So in an ideal world, at least for me, this would be the last bucket you would pull from because your taxable accounts, right, goes potentially tax-free to the heirs. That's good. Tax deferred, it does not. They will pay tax on that, generally through an inherited IRA. But this account can be passed at death tax-free as well if it's qualified, which means it meets some of those other rules, 59.5, 5-year rule, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, again, a long-term play, which means this is a good place for equities for stocks, as they will grow the most over time. This account, unlike those tax deferreds, does not have an RMD, which means that the government does not essentially make you take money out. Because if you take money out of a Roth account, they don't get any money. It's ideally tax-free, which means you don't pay taxes on the money you put in. You've already paid taxes on it. You don't pay taxes on the growth, assuming it's a qualified distribution. So they have nothing to gain. So they don't make you take it out, which means it can sit there forever and ever and ever in theory. I mean, your kids or the grandkids or whatever are going to take it out. But the idea is it could grow a long time and you get tax-free growth. Let me just tell you, there are not that many places in the Internal Revenue Code that you get tax-free growth. There's a couple, but there's not many. This is one of them. Tax-free, that word Roth, that free, that's a nice 4-letter word there. Let me just tell you. All right. So the idea here is that you want to align your asset allocation, right? We talked about last week, with your asset location. Meaning that if you need income taking money out, a good place to have that is either going to be in your taxable account for early retirement or your tax deferred account because you're going to take the money out and you're going to pay taxes on anyway. So that's a good place to have your bonds. Your long-term legacy stuff should all be towards Roth, and your long-term growth would be a balance between deferred and tax-free, right? So again, this is an optimization technique. This is all about protecting against the risk of future tax increases that, in my opinion, probably will happen at some point in the future. And it's all about maximizing the types of accounts based upon your plan, your goals, your life, your retirement, things like that. So if you can really combo kind of the bucket approach we've talked about the last 2 weeks and pair this up with the types of accounts you have at your disposal, because not everybody's going to have all these types, depending on what you actually have, this is a great optimization factor to help you maximize your investments over the long term to include the tax impact. So think about it. You have a retirement plan. You've done the work. You've gone through your needs, wants, and wishes. You have a feasible plan of record. You know your income needs. you allocate your investments based upon that, and then you line that up from a location perspective, from an asset location perspective, this is where you're really starting to see the benefits of retirement planning. So the whole idea of life-centric retirement plan is you start with your life, and then you design the money around it, not your life around the money. Most people do it backwards. Retirement is all about you maximizing your life first, then optimizing the money second. So get in the right order, and you will have a retirement that is prosperous and enjoyable and purposeful. Hopefully this helps you on a path to that type of retirement. Until next time, hope you have a great day. Thanks again for taking the time to watch this week's episode of the True Wealth Financial Show. I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Additionally, you can find more information on our website at www.truewealth.show. One final note, though, as we wrap up to today's show. While I hope the information was helpful, valuable, and insightful, it's really for information and educational purposes only. Prior to making any decisions or taking any actions, I'd strongly encourage you to talk to your legal, tax, estate, or financial advisor who's familiar with the unique circumstances of your particular personal situation. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, hope you have a great day.